Hello everyone, this is the second of my 5 short videos for students of Gävle University in Sweden. I'm not a criminologist, but I'm thinking about criminology with you today. What can we learn from criminological concepts? This is part 2. I want to think about norms, deviance, and functionalist approaches to understanding society. Good. Where did we break off in my last video clip? We were defining several basic criminological terms. And I asked a question at the end of the presentation, why are some things illegal? Why does the lawmaker make some things illegal? And we noted things you could argue are made illegal for the benefit of the privileged in society. So I was drawing on ideas from Karl Marx here. It's about class oppression. And I noted, this is quite interesting, thinking about social work as being primarily social control. How do you feel as a social worker if Marx points his finger at you and say, actually, you're a social control agent rather than a caring social professional? How would you feel about that part of our identity, that part of our professional work? Good. Hold on to that idea. I want to move on now, also historically move to more recent thoughts about criminological topics. I want to think about deviance over the course of this particular video. Before I do so, let's give a flip side answer to my original question. Why are some things illegal? Some of you, when I was giving you this Marxist conflict approach, were shaking your heads and saying, I don't really see it that way. You're making it way too political, Magnus. It really is much simpler. A different viewpoint would say laws come from our consensus in societal. They come from societal consensus. Most people in a society can agree broadly on what is wrong and what should be prohibited by law. A lovely exercise to illustrate this point, you can do this on your own, you can do it with a friend, press pause in a minute. Try to make a list of things which you think are definitely wrong. That is, things which should clearly be illegal and treated as crimes. An example, outside of wartime situations, murder is gonna be wrong, isn't it? That's gonna be illegal in any society, right? Make a list of similar things which are so obviously things that we should be prohibiting, that we should be making illegal. Okay, I'm guessing your list has a number of points on it. This is quite an easy exercise to do. Very quickly, we can find a handful of things, nasty, unpleasant things, which in every society we would presumably want to prohibit. So it illustrates this idea that collectively, if we're from the same society, we have quite a lot of agreement as to what things should be illegal. Basically, this all boils down to the fact that we have shared expectations as to how people should behave. Forget about crime for a minute. So we can extend this consensus idea regarding crime to other areas of human behavior. It seems to me that we have collectively shared ideas of how to behave in many situations. Let me give you a silly example. We're in a pub, it's a rather full pub. I walk past trying to get my beers to the table where my friends are sitting, and I bump into you, and I spill beer over to you. I spill your beer on you, and I spill my beer on you. What am I expected to do? It was me that caused this accident. And I think there's no doubt here, it's very appropriate for me to apologize, to try and apologize sincerely. If I spill your drink, I should offer to buy you another one, right? And if I spill beer onto your nice jacket, it would be nice if I would offer to have it dry cleaned. And typically you would say, no, it's all right, don't worry about it, mate. But I'm expected to make these gestures. And this is the kind of thing I'm thinking about. In various everyday situations, the way in which we behave is very much determined by shared expectations of how we should behave. What do we call these shared expectations of behaviour? What's the jargon in criminology or in sociology? We're talking about social norms here, or for short, just norms. So our societies have these norms. Norms are a little bit like laws, aren't they? There's definitely some parallels there, because they say what should be done or what should not be done. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. So there's a parallel there with the idea of laws. But it's worth noting, norms are not formally produced, they're not formally regulated through laws and other formalized rules. Some of them are not even written down. Good, I'm whizzing through some interesting jargon and concepts here. This takes us to the idea of deviance. What on earth is deviance? Deviance, you can also talk about deviant behaviour. What is deviance? A very simple answer, not really completely correct, but a simple general answer, in a general sense, deviance is simply breaking norms. When I break norms repeatedly or in a big way, this is deviant behaviour. Examples of deviant behaviour: wearing clothes or makeup not typical for your peer group, that's breaking appearance norms. My t-shirt was quite a provocative image back in 1972 when this photograph was taken. Lou Reed here is wearing lots of makeup. And in the 1970s, it was quite taboo for men to wear makeup. Makeup was worn by women. So this is quite interesting. This was a form of deviance, appearance deviance, fashion deviance, if you like. Heresy is breaking religious norms. Being sad is breaking health norms. You know, how are you? Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine. We're always fine, we're always great. You know, we're not allowed to be otherwise, right? Criminal acts are, of course, breaking legal norms, but it's worth stressing, not all deviance is illegal. Lots of deviance is legal, but nonetheless noticed by others, not tolerated by others. So there's an overlap. Some deviance is indeed illegal, but some isn't. It's well worth noting that deviance really has to be understood in its societal context. Deviance is not universal, but rather it relates to a particular place, a particular society, or it relates to a particular time, a particular historical period. And I think this leads to two interesting questions. You might want to pause the video and scratch your heads once again. Question number one, could you think of behaviour which is considered deviant somewhere, but not somewhere else? Okay, that's my first question. My second question, can you think of behaviour which was considered deviant in the past, but not today? So two questions. Behaviour which is deviant somewhere, but not somewhere else. Question two, behaviour which was deviant in the past, but is not today. Did you come up with examples? I can easily give you a funny example for the first one. So I live in Germany. I don't know if any of you have ever had a holiday in Germany on the Baltic coast, so on the eastern side of Germany. Of course, the coast which would have been in the former German Democratic Republic, the former communist society. If you go there and have a holiday there on the beach, you'll notice something quite funny. Lots of people aren't wearing any clothes. Indeed, my East German friends use a lovely expression. If I go bathing, if I go into the sea swimming with my swimming trunks on, I'm a Textilbadender. In other words, wearing clothes when swimming is considered to be something deviant, and the more natural, instinctive thing to do is to walk into the sea stark naked. And the explanation is quite simple. In the former communist days, most things were highly problematic. You couldn't just have a drink, talk about politics, and listen to Lou Reed records. So most pleasures were banned, and that was one of the one pleasures that wasn't banned. But it's a lovely example, naturism on beaches. In some places, very, very deviant behaviour. In other places, very much fitting with social norms. I'm guessing my second question is quite easy to answer. Even going back to my childhood in the 1970s, lots of things that today are very tolerated and considered to be quite everyday would have been considered to be deviant behaviour. Various forms of sexuality were in those days very restricted in lots of societies. Or even something like being a single parent would have been highly stigmatized. And again, you can make quite an easy long list there. So my point is we have to understand deviance in the context of the society which we're talking about, which we're looking at today. Getting people to stick to these social norms. What is the reaction encouraging people to keep to norms? You know, how do we actually regulate this in practice? When I spilt your beer in the pub, you know, why did I have to say sorry? You know, how is this regulated in practice? The sociological jargon or the criminological jargon here is the word sanctions. We use sanctions to encourage people to keep to norms. A little detail which is well worth noting, in everyday English, the word sanction usually means something unpleasant. So we hear the word sanction, we think of some kind of unpleasant thing as a response to something else. In sociology, a sanction can be a pleasant thing or an unpleasant thing. We use the word sanction in two different contexts. You can talk about positive sanctions. Non-conformity, non-compliance is rewarded with positive sanctions. So, example, I make a tasteful, funny joke, you laugh in a friendly way. Okay, that's an example of positive sanctions, the friendly laughter that responds to a fun and tasteful joke. If I make a tasteless joke, that's met with stony silence. And this is an example of negative sanctions. Norm breaking, in this case my tasteless joke, that's punished with negative sanctions. In my example, stony silence. So there you are. Be careful of that word sanction. In sociology, it's used in a slightly finer way than in everyday language. Deviance. So we've talked about this idea of deviance. It's out there. For some deviance, for instance, some crime, it's clearly bad and in no way beneficial. You know, we don't like people stealing our cars. Clearly, that's not really good for anybody. Typically, the people that steal cars are not very, very well off from it. So much deviance doesn't really seem to be beneficial in any way at all. Despite this, all societies seem to have some deviance. You know, it really is something which is out there everywhere. Can you think of any benefits or advantages to deviance? Why might deviance be good or helpful for our society in some way? It's an interesting question, isn't it? It's maybe worth pausing, scratching your heads for a few moments. Get your head around that question. Is there some advantage to deviance? Now, this is a question that was posed more than a century ago, actually, something like 125 years ago. And there are a number of very interesting benefits of deviant behaviour. Firstly, it helps bring about change, create tomorrow's society. My t-shirt example is quite nice. In the 1970s, Lou Reed and David Bowie were wearing makeup. The first, you know, innovators doing something new. 10 years later, by the time when I was 8 or 10, in Britain, every singer had to be covered in makeup. So it's kind of nice, by doing something differently to others, you're bringing about tomorrow's society, you're bringing about positive societal change. Good. The other two advantages I have on my list here are somewhat more cautious. Deviance creates solidarity. Excuse me, I'm tongue-tied. Deviance creates a kind of we feeling. You know, because those deviants are different, we are underlining our own commonalities. So it creates solidarity, creates a we feeling. It can also clarify social norms. In other words, it helps us understand where our boundaries are. And the jargon here would be boundary maintenance. Now, all of these benefits I'm listing here, I'm taking ideas from Emil Durkheim, as I said, going back to the 19th century. So this is stuff that we've understood for a fair long while. You know, this is relatively early sociology still. The changing sociology of deviance. Early sociologists saw deviance in terms of its function to society, its function to individuals. And that's why we talk about it as being functionalist sociology or functionalism. And Durkheim would be a good early example of a functionalist thinker. Durkheim's famous quote here, crime is normal because a society exempt from it is utterly impossible. Crime is normal because a society exempt from it is utterly impossible. So shared norms, they're kind of glue holding society together. Shared norms, shared value, shared culture. This is the stuff that sticks our societies together. Good. So some actually 19th century perspectives on norms, deviant behaviour, deviance. What does this tell us for social work? What are the consequences for social work if we take these perspectives, these older perspectives on norm breaking and deviance? Post-war social work with individuals and families, I think it was very much shaped by this functionalist thinking. Even by the 1950s, this thinking was still very much on vogue. How might a functionalist sociologist expect a social worker to work with an individual or family with problems? You know, what does this theory lead to in terms of practical social work? The answer is really, really interesting. I guess the jargon here would be social casework. I've got a famous book from this period, social casework. That was a term we used to describe social work with individual cases. The language is quite strange, isn't it? In the 1950s, British or US social work, it saw the client's difficulties as being due to their maladjustment to their social environment. So we had a client in a social environment and the client was maladjusted. It wasn't really fitting in with its society. So the maladjusted client is helped to fit in better to their social environment. And that's really the theme in the social work literature of this period. How do we help the client to fit in better? Typically by counselling. It seems that back in these days, UK and US social workers, quite differently today, they had time back then to counsel their clients, counseling using ideas from psychology, using ideas from psychotherapy, using ideas from psychoanalysis. That was very much the fashion in the post-war period. Interesting, huh? So there you are. A question for you to take away with you: how do you find this idea? Is it okay? Are you okay with the idea of your client being maladjusted, and your task as a social work professional is to help your client to adjust better to the society around them? Think about whether you're happy with that, whether you're comfortable with that. Is that really what I'm doing as a social worker? It seems to have been back then in the 1950s and the 1960s. I hope you've enjoyed this second video. I'll see you shortly in the third.